When the Black Watch Regiment took control of the town of Azabaya, they little expected to liberate the war's most unlikely prisoners. 2 Kenyan lorry drivers captured by the Iraqi militia.
They beat us and take everything we have. Money, everything, we don't have anything.
David Shira Mukaria and Jakubu Maina Kaimu were delivering aid to Iraq from Kuwait when they were taken prisoner by 20 men with guns. They were locked up in a disused school, blindfolded and bound hand and foot.
Like this.
3 days.
3 days.
Like that.
And leg and eyes.
Leg and
then
eyes.
we sleep in the floor. So when they come inside, you can't see who is coming inside. When we cry because of too much, you see here, this is the rope, because they tied by rope. It's ropes.
The 2 men were held for 10 days in total, petrified, certain they would die. They were even shown on Al Jazeera TV during their captivity. The soldiers of the Black Watch were acting on a tip-off from locals when they stormed the building to rescue the 2 bewildered captives.
Yeah, they were very happy to see the boys. I think they've obviously been under a few stressful days. So, as you can imagine, seeing the jocks scream in there, you know, they were happy.
British soldiers are now taking David and Jakubu back to Kuwait so they can go home, simply relieved that their long ordeal is over. Caroline Wyatt, BBC News in Azabaya.
Now let's have a look at some other news.
Fire in self-defense, as happened at a checkpoint in Najaf. They were responding to the deaths of 7 Iraqi women and children at that checkpoint on Monday. The British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw has warned that British and American troops will face what he called fierce resistance from troops loyal to Saddam Hussein as his regime enters what he called its final stages. He also claimed he was increasingly probable that an attack on the Baghdad market last Wednesday, the first of 2 attacks in the centre of Baghdad last week, which caused a large number of civilian casualties, was probably caused by an Iraqi weapon, not a coalition missile or weapon. Well, on day 13 of the war in Iraq, this is the latest military situation. British forces say they've taken control of Zubaia, which is south of Basra. In Shatra, just north of Nasiriyah, American soldiers have confirmed they killed an unarmed Iraqi driver at a checkpoint. That shooting came just hours after 7 civilians were killed near Najaf. America has called this a tragic loss of innocent life. US troops have engaged in fierce fighting at Hindaya, which is just 50 miles south of Baghdad. And that's their closest reported position to Saddam Hussein's power base in the capital. The city is again under coalition attack. American forces have bombed Republican guards on the southern approaches to the capital. There's been no let-up in the aerial bombardment of the capital itself. The targets hit include a palace used by Saddam Hussein's younger son. Well, let's look first at the challenges, particularly at the checkpoints, and this issue of self-defense versus security. Here's Tim Wilcox.
Members of the US 3rd Infantry regrouping after a mission north of Najaf. Tensions are high here, these soldiers unsure of when and where the enemy will attack. Last night, some of their colleagues were involved in one of the bloodiest incidents in the war so far. At a checkpoint, troops opened fire on a van which failed to stop. Commanders say they fired warning shots, but afterwards found the van was filled with women and children. At least 7 were killed.
Certainly these were innocent people, but we continue to see these tactics of terror all over the battle space against UK forces and US forces, and so they're watching very closely. Still trying to get to the bottom of the actual facts of what happened. There are news reports, there are eye reports. It's what we know as the fog of war.
Fog of war that became denser with this suicide attack over the weekend, a tactic that's changed the nature of the conflict forever. It's made American troops warier of civilians, suspicious of every man, woman and child. There are practical rules for guards on checkpoints in war zones. An official statement says warning shots were fired, then shots at the engine to stop the car involved. But the US account of the shooting appears to conflict with one eyewitness report. A correspondent for the Washington Post was near the checkpoint, which was protected by armoured vehicles. He describes how, as the Toyota drove towards them, the officer over his radio ordered his troops to fire a warning shot, but they didn't. So, with the van still advancing at speed, he shouted, "Stop him, Red 1, stop him." The soldiers opened fire with about 6 shots from a machine gun. After calling a ceasefire, their commander was then heard to say, "You just killed a family," adding, "That's because you didn't fire a warning shot soon enough." An investigation's begun, and it's reported that bereaved Iraqi families involved have already been offered compensation.
In some cases, we can make, when we believe it's appropriate, down at the lowest levels, there's immediate compensations that can be made to families. That can happen, and we do that all over the world, not just here where we're in combat operations. And that's a commander's discretion to decide whether there's some immediate compensation that just says, "We're sorry," that we can do.
But as the coalition consolidates its grip on the country, there will inevitably be more checkpoints and more dangers. In a fresh incident today, US troops shot dead what turned out to be an unarmed Iraqi driver at a checkpoint near Shatra. Instructions have been given to use roadblocks to halt vehicles well before they're checked. British soldiers are also having to check thousands of civilian vehicles every day. And Army spokesmen admit the recent killings will severely undermine attempts to win over the local population. Tim Wilcox, BBC News.
Well, in a moment, I'll be going live to Nicholas Witchell to see how Central Command here at Asaliya Base has been handling this issue. But first, let's get the latest from up in southern Iraq, closer and closer to Baghdad, with our correspondent Gavin Hewitt, who's travelling with the Marine 3rd Infantry Division, somewhere up in that area. Gavin, what can you tell us, given that you are limited in what you can say?
Well, I think 2 things. I'm actually with the 3rd Infantry Division, the division from which the soldiers who were involved in that incident came. And just first of all on that, there's no doubt the tension that the soldiers feel after the suicide bombing which took place on Saturday. And indeed, the soldiers who were involved in this incident with the women and children were from the same unit who lost people from that suicide bombing. And I think what it illustrates is that on these highways where there has been harassment, sniping, some clashes, American soldiers are very, very edgy. And the main, I think, problem that I see, apart from the obvious loss of life and how terrible it must be for those families, is that what this does is lessens the human contact between the Americans, if you like, the invaders, and the people they're invading on behalf. And I think that makes for a coldness. I saw it today. I tried to approach an Iraqi family, and it was, it was difficult. And I think that claiming that this invasion is on behalf of the Iraqi people becomes more difficult if you can't contact them. So that's in relation to that incident.
Now, what about what you can tell us about what's happening around you and to the north of you, particularly as you move closer to Baghdad, Gavin?
Well, I think the first ground clashes have happened between American forces and the 2 Republican Guard divisions that guard, if you like, the entrances to Baghdad. And American commanders, in a way, believe that these are the opening clashes of what will turn out to be the battle for Baghdad itself. Now, the Medina Division, which is one of the Republican Guard divisions, the Americans believe that's been very seriously depleted via air attacks. But their intelligence has been wrong before, and no doubt it will be tested in the days ahead as to how willing they are to fight. But up in Al-Hindaya, which is again a town by the Euphrates, only about 55 miles from Baghdad itself, US ground troops were on the ground actually fighting units from a Republican Guard division. Now, this means essentially that the clashes which all of these convoys coming up the road over the last few days have been building up towards, they actually have begun. And I think we're going to see more of that in the next few days. And these really are the key clashes of the war.
Gavin, thanks for joining us. He joins us from the 3rd Infantry Division, somewhere up near Baghdad. Those pictures we're seeing are from Hindaya yesterday, Monday, an indication of the intensity of the exchanges there. Well, Nicholas Witchell is joining me now from Asaliya, the main base, the headquarters of Central Command. Nick Witchell, how revealing would you say Central Command has been about the operations which are being mounted, not just in southern Iraq, but all over the country?
I think to endorse what Gavin was just telling us, Nick, the impression at Central Command here is that a significant land move up towards Baghdad is underway. I think Gavin's interpretation of it as the opening stages of the battle for Baghdad is endorsed from Central Command here, and I think that these are significant developments with US forces up there, as Gavin was saying, engaging 2 divisions, as we understand it, of the Republican Guard, and achieving, we're told, a degree of success. So I think that the impression one has here at Central Command is that that land engagement, the first stages of that crucial land engagement, are indeed underway or are certainly imminent. Elsewhere, a rather quieter picture in terms of engagements at the key strategic points, Nasiriyah and, of course, down Basra, where British forces are now in Az-Zubayr, where they are trying to secure complete control of that important town on the southern outskirts of Basra. So everywhere, I think, as we were reporting yesterday, a growing sense, not a great sense of confidence, but a growing sense of confidence that in military terms on the ground they are back on course, getting back on course, and that they are